Hey, what's up everyone? Nathan back with another discussion video. Today I want to talk about a pretty fun topic, which is going to be the question of who is the best wall breaker in Pokemon right now. Meaning, if we leave the Uber Pokemon out and mostly talk about Smogon's overused tier with all the new Crown Tundra Pokemon in it, which Pokemon is the best wall breaker? This is a topic I've been thinking about for a little while now. And at first it started simple, thought it was gonna be this easy breezy, fun little video, but I wanted to wait first for the usage stats, and then I wanted to wait and account for the viability rankings first. And then I came up with my own ranking system when I'm judging these wall breakers, so I can add like some legitimacy to what I'm saying. And one thing led to another, and this has ended up being a huge project for me, like a week long. But to clarify first, if you don't know what I'm talking about so far, when I talk about the term wall breakers, I'm talking about Pokemon who have incredible damage output that can rip off huge attacks that your opponent's Pokemon can't withstand, even with a dedicated defensive Pokemon like a Toxapex or a very famously tanky Hippowdon. Now this is slightly different from your sweepers, whose job is to beat several of your opponent's Pokemon one by one, all while being difficult to revenge kill or threaten out, usually due to speed boosting moves. But admittedly, this difference is a pretty fine line, because if you wanted to call something like a Scarf Dracovish a wall breaker, or if you decide to call it a sweeper, I personally wouldn't care, and I think the line is definitely thin in those cases. I just mentioned this because I'm not going to judge these Pokemon based on how hard they are to revenge kill afterwards, because once I've got my Pokemon in and it's gotten its knockout, I don't really care what happens afterwards as much as I would with the sweeper. Because yeah, you know what? I acknowledge there's lots of Pokemon that can come in to revenge kill a Conkeldurr after it gets a knockout. But as long as that Conkeldurr gets that knockout in the first place, I don't really care. Again, it's a sweeper's job to keep going after it gets a knockout and keep sweeping. Not my wall breakers. The wall breakers are just to beat those big, scary threats. Oftentimes, a wall breaker just needs to knock out one crucial defensive Pokemon, and then their job is done. But if that's the case, I really got to make sure that it can secure that knockout when its name is called, and it does it as effectively as possible. But first things first, before we start talking about specific Pokemon, I've got to set down some criteria first. Lots of Pokemon can hit hard after all, but what am I looking for when I name the best wall breaker in Pokemon? My first category is going to be how hard does the Pokemon hit, because at the end of the day, as the name suggests, these Pokemon are wall breakers. And if they can't at least 2-hit KO defensive Pokemon swapping in on you, they're not going to be very good at their job. One of the best examples of this is Charizard, who I've been having a blast with down in the rarely used tier. This Pokemon's Fire Blast already hits pretty hard with Charizard's base 109 special attack, but you get to multiply that by 50% when its fire attacks are boosted by the sun, which also activates Charizard's solar power ability, boosting the damage by 50% once again. And just because we're sadistic or crazy like that, we can also throw choice specs on there as well for yet another 50% boost. This Fire Blast now hits so hard that even a Blissey with max special defense, which is essentially the greatest special wall in Pokemon for all intents and purposes, can no longer swap into the move without getting 2-hit KO'd. Because for example, Cinderace really isn't that strong on a basic stat concerned level. It's only got slightly above average attack, and it's forced to run heavy duty boots as an item, which can't boost its offense very much. But of course, its amazing move pool and its ability Libero gives it a stab bonus for almost every attack that's going to be hitting really hard, if not super effectively. And as a result, almost everything is 2-hit KO by Cinderace as a result, and it's still a good wall breaker. Also, as an additional clarification, 2-hit KOs are a big thing to look for when you're looking at wall breakers, because realistically, few Pokemon are going to be able to 1-hit KO the entire metagame. That's a pretty harsh criteria to look for, but a 2-hit KO can be just as good. I mean, if my opponent has a Blissey and I bring in a banded Pheromosa to start wall breaking, it doesn't matter if I can get the 1-hit KO on the Corviknight coming in, because the Pheromosa is just going to get the next hit anyway because it's so fast. This is why, generally speaking, a Pokemon that is fast and can finish the job with a second hit is often a better wall breaker than a slower Pokemon that can do it in one. Not always, there's still lots of great wall breakers that are very slow, like Alola Marowak and Magearna and Melmetal, but it just always helps. But on to our next category, which is going to be how much are you forced to guess with this Pokemon. So a good example of what I mean by this point is going to be your Choice Specs Analytic Magnezone, which is one of the hardest hitting Pokemon out there, no question. The problem is that its 2 stab attacks, Electric and Steel, can be handled by any team with a Water type and a Ground type, and good predictions. Because if you swap to the Ground type on every Electric move and a Water type for every one of Magnezone's Steel type moves, not only is the Magnezone going to be a pretty lousy wall breaker and not doing the damage that you need it to, but it's also going to be stuck in these bad matchups after it gets walled, which gives your opponent some strong momentum in return, which is again completely antithetical to the point of a wall breaker. This is why Pokemon with great coverage moves that are very spammable, for example like the Fighting and Dark type combination, have it so easy. I've broken it down before in this video, but Pokemon like this, especially again that Fighting and Dark type coverage, are extremely tough to swap into safely, because even if you do guess correctly and you swap into a Pokemon that can take the Dark type move and you guess that your Pokemon is going for that move first, you're still getting hit by a super strong knockoff that strips you of your item. And if you guess wrong, then Pokemon like these that don't force you to make these big, bold predictions can help you get the most out of your wall breaker. To go back to that solar powered Charizard, it's also great in this category because with the exception of I guess Heatran, I never have to guess with this thing either because 99% of the time I'm just clicking Fire Blast and watching things explode and go boom. For all my weebs out there, it's like the story arc in the 3rd season of Haikyuu, where there's a coach who doesn't want any fancy bells or whistles or cool attacks for his spikers. He just wants a plain and simple ace who hits unbelievably hard and doesn't really give a shit what you do to stop it. You guys, as Pokemon players, should take the same attitude as that coach when you're looking for a wall breaker and get something that hits as hard as possible where you really don't have to guess what your opponent's going to go to and you can just start blasting. And the final category for strong wall breakers is going to be how easy is it to get your wall breaker into position to do its job. So to go back to that solar powered Charizard I mentioned earlier, sure, it's going to be hitting ridiculously hard and sure, it doesn't really require much guesswork where its Fire Blast nukes everything short of Heatran, but the amount of setup that Pokemon needs to get going is frankly unbelievable. You need to make sure your opponent doesn't set up Stealth Rocks, you need to set up the Sun as well to give Charizard its 2 different attack buffs, and then you need to actually get the Pokemon in safely, because even without Stealth Rocks, this Pokemon is still very fragile and its health is cut substantially every turn from that solar power ability. So really, for all the power that I've been gassing it up about, it doesn't really matter if you don't have the chance to leverage all of its strengths. Whereas on the flip side, Pokemon like Landorus and Heatran, who have naturally high defenses and great typings, make wonderful wall breakers in that sense because they're so easy to get in and they can just start threatening immediately and very easily with huge hits. This concept of being able to swap in on moves safely is the foundational basis of bulky offense teams. Pokemon like these and Tyranitar and Reuniclus can swap in on all kinds of moves, but once they're in, they're still strong enough that they can demand their pound of flesh from their opponent. But hey, that was a lot of talking about criteria, so let's just finally get into it and judge who really is the best wall breaker in Crown Tundra Overused. I actually went through the newly updated viability rankings that were uploaded about 4 days ago, and I personally judged how well these Pokemon do in every category that I just listed. And when I first thought of this video, I thought it would just be kind of like, I'd think things through and I'd personally judge them based on these 3 categories, but I was getting frustrated with myself and with my wishy-washy logic on this, and I kept judging Pokemon based on these preconceived notions, and I had these biases that were influencing my decision making. So I actually sat down for several hours yesterday in Photoshop and went through what I consider the top 25 wall breakers in the metagame right now and compared them as wall breakers versus the entire overused meta right now, just to see how good they were as wall breakers with a slightly more holistic and a slightly more, I don't want to say scientific approach, but less biased at least. And once I made that document, I could also grade them in terms of predictions needed and availability with a little bit more knowledge too. And you know what? That took me a super long time, but I'm really glad I did it because I ended up learning a lot about the state of the metagame. I learned a lot about these different Pokemon, and I actually corrected some of those preconceived notions that I mentioned earlier. So Pokemon like Tyranitar and Landorus that I thought were going to be really impressive wall breakers really were actually not that impressive once I charted everything out and looked at it in the scope of the criteria that I just mentioned. And the same is true for other Pokemon. There's lots of Pokemon that I just weren't really on my radar, and I just thought, okay, I'll give them a shot and see how they do, and they ended up being fantastic wall breakers according to my criteria. So I've learned a lot about some Pokemon that I was sleeping on. Also, I'm too conceited to let all my good work go to waste, so I'm going to put up a second video, like a sequel video to this. We're going to go through all these 25 different charts I've made, and I'm going to talk about these matchups first in the metagame and talk about each Pokemon individually and what's holding them back, if they're at the bottom of my list of a good wall breaker, what they need to work on, and actually make a full complete tier list. We're going to rank all of these wall breakers one by one afterwards. But for now, I'm just going to talk about my top 3 right now and an honorable mention too. So without further ado, let's get into it. Just outside the top 3 and number 4 on my list, so I guess that makes it the de facto honorable mention here, is going to go to Banded Pheromosa. It's ironic, but of all the Pokemon on this list, despite not being in my top 3, I think it's actually just the best holistic Pokemon. It can run really good setup Quiver Dance sets. It's really good at kind of rapid spin, hit and run utility sets, etc. But if we're just talking about pure wall breaking with its Choice Band set, then Pheromosa is terrible. It's way worse. It's awful. It's in the lowly position of only the 4th best wall breaker in Pokemon by my criteria. Again, the fact that it's not completely excelling and completely dominant in it means it's one of its worst sets, but it's still 4th. So that's insane. That just goes to show how good it is. If I had to talk about what's keeping it out of the top 3, it's definitely not hitting power because there's literally only 3 Pokemon that can swap into it safely if the Pheromosa predicts correctly. But that's kind of the rub of it in my opinion, because if you're going to be a choice locked Pokemon, I think your main move has to be extremely spammable. Urshifu, for example, is also choice banded, but I'm not going to be docking on this criteria nearly as much because it really doesn't need to think when it comes in. It just clicks Wicked Blow 90% of the time and maybe close combat 10% of the time to kind of establish a threat. Maybe if your opponent's being dumb and swapping into dark types too much, it can do that a good amount for sure, and U-turn's this good thing to throw it as well. But Wicked Blow is going to be your go-to spamming answer like 90% of the time. Whereas Pheromosa needs to click Triple Axle for about half the metagame, which is problematic because contact moves are dangerous in a metagame with Garchomp and Moltres. and triple axle has 3 different contacts, and it's also low accuracy. So that's like kind of flawed. But then you also have to click close combat for the other half of the metagame. So even if you do click triple axle and you get the 3 hits successfully and you don't get hit by contact abilities that kind of cripple you and it works fine, you might have still need to click close combat in the situation. And then there's even the factor that you need to run drill run for the talk specs if you want to 2-hit KO it. And even in that situation, you can drill run the talk specs. They can notice that that you've drilled run and they can swap out to a flying type knowing that you're banded. So again, like I think being choice locked in a situation where your move isn't extremely spammable is very problematic in my opinion. So yeah, especially with that talk specs matchup concern taken into account, Pheromosa, I mean, like it hits as hard as anyone on this list. It's ridiculous. I still think that as a holistic Pokemon, it's maybe the best Pokemon in the metagame right now. And frankly, it can easily start sweeping afterwards after it gets that first hit due to its amazing beast boost ability. But just as a pure wall breaker, I think it's limited, and it's only 4th on my list here. Getting to number 3 on this list, I'm gonna go with a surprise pick of a Pokemon, even to me, which is gonna be Choice Specs Latios. I was actually shocked when I charted this thing out how good it covers the majority of the metagame. As long as you're smart and you click the right move, Latios players only have trouble with 4 Pokemon overused right now. And 2 of those counters, which are Blissey and Tyranitar, are completely crippled by tricking them with Choice Specs, so you have options in those matchups too. And unlike Pheromosa, which can be tricky to get in with its terrible defenses, Latios is a fantastic addition to a team's defenses. Even without recovery moves, Latios is a beast with resistances to fighting type moves, grass, water, fire, electric, psychic, and is even immune to ground type moves, which is insane. Like Pheromosa, it was graded poorly in the prediction department though, but I give Latios the edge here because predictions essentially just boil down to a 50-50 on whether they're going to go to a steel type or not. Unlike Pheromosa, which had 3 things to consider when you consider the matchup with Toxapex and the drill run. So really the 50-50 boils down to if they're going to a steel type. There are some mix-ups with fairies too, but they get hit so hard by psychic for the most part that it's not the same fear as with steel types. And with steel types, it's either do I click Mystical Fire and spam them and it's great, and once again, even if they go to something that isn't a steel type, Mystical Fire is pretty useful due to its special attack drop. But if they're not going to a steel type, then I can click Psychic, I can click Draco Meteor. They're very spammable moves, which gives it huge points to its prediction in my opinion. I almost put this guy in second because with the grading system I came up with, it was a bit of a tie between this and the actual second place Pokemon. But you know, when I thought about it, having its 2 biggest problems be Blissey and Heatran, which are both extremely common Pokemon in the metagame, having those be the 2 big problems didn't thrill me. So yeah, I mean, I put it here in 3rd instead. Still extremely good. It was a huge surprise for me that when I ranked this out to have it end up this high on the list. I knew it was underrated for sure. I heard from lots of good players that it was underrated and that thing could really wall it, but it wasn't until I actually charted out and looked through everything and went, oh my gosh, this thing is a menace right now. It's also worth noting that similar to Pheromosa being better than I thought it was ranked on this list due to its versatility, Latios is kind of the opposite of that, where it doesn't have the same flexibility and it can't run different sets like other Pokemon. I'm not going to grade that against it if I'm just ranking it on pure wall breaking potential, but it does warrant mention that it is more one-dimensional than your Magirnas or your Pheromosas, or even really your Spectures, who can run substitute Will-O-Wisp sets really well actually. Speaking of which, Spectre is actually going to be ranked as my 2nd best wall breaker in Crown Tundra right now. Probably unsurprising to everyone that's played against this thing without a counter to it because it's insane. I mean, it's faster than almost everything in the metagame unboosted, and it hits harder too. Shadow Balls are tricky to swap into with the best of times, and even if you have a Blissey or a very high special defense dark type to help you out, this thing can still completely control the pace of a game. And I was debating docking Spectre points for this actually because more so than most of these Pokemon, it is really shut down by its counters. Like if a counter comes into Spectre, it is not doing anything. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the fact that it has so limited counters and it's so obvious you need to go to it, and you can't really go to anything else as like an in-between. Mid-grounds are kind of tough with Spectre. So knowing that, I actually gave it some points in the prediction department because if I'm in a battle and I bring in my Spectre against an opponent and they look at their team and they realize that literally everything is smoked by it except for their dark type and their Blissey, like it's a very obvious play at that point. So I know they're going to go to that. I know they're not going to try to get tricky and risk the whole game on this. And then I can make a double switch there to a fighting type Pokemon, and then they're really screwed then. So yeah, what I just described is a pretty gutsy prediction, and I did end up docking Spectre points in the prediction department as a result. But outside of this thing is a beast with specs, and it's almost impossible to wall. It's actually Dracovish-esque in that once its counters are gone, it's only a matter of time until Spectre can claim the win. And now for my final Pokemon, my number 1 best wall breaker in Crown Tundra in the current metagame. I mean, it's got to be Urshifu Single Strike. Was there any question? In terms of hitting hard, there's few that match Urshifu. Its Wicked Blow is an unbelievable nuke that levels everything outside of a few select counters, making your predictions very limited and very easy as the player. It really ticks every box I mentioned here when I'm looking for a wall breaker. Even its matchups versus the top tier threats are incredible. It 2-hit KOs even the strongest physical tanks, to be honest. The only two problem matchups that I've got for a Shifu here are one, Buzzwole, which again, you can even U-turn on. It's not a big deal if they go into it as long as you predict that with a U-turn, so not the end of the world. But Buzzwole isn't even a very common Pokemon in the overused tier. When you compare it with the likes of Heatran or Blissey that were walling some of the other Pokemon that we mentioned today, it's much less abundant, it's much less common, and also it can do less when it swaps in. Whereas Heatran, if it swaps in on you, it can set up rocks or toxic, or can get some trapping sets going once it gets in. But Buzzwole's doing what in comparison? Like hitting you with an Ice Punch for 15% or roosting? I mean, honestly, it's probably roosting, because even Buzzwole, which is one of the best counters to Urshifu out there, is taking a solid 30% from Wicked Blow, and it needs to recover that back off. The other problem matchup that I should mention in overused is Clefable, which again, you can predict with Urshifu, and you can 2-hit KO it with Iron Head, or you can even U-turn out to a better matchup. But it says a lot that Clefables are almost all physically invested now, because its almost sole job nowadays is being a Urshifu counter with other utility rules. So can I really dock a Pokemon points for being so metagame warping that the metagame has, as a result, warped around it? So yeah, that's gonna do it for my list. I hope you guys enjoyed me going through the process and deciding this. Again, I was not playing for this video to consume my week like it has so far, but I really just thought it was a fun thought experiment and kind of consumed me as a result. But if you're wondering what some of the other big wall breakers of overused are, like your Shifu Rapid Strike or Magnezone, or you're probably interested in where Makirna is and why it didn't even make an honorable mention in this list, I mean, tune in for my video that I'm hoping to have out soon, where I'll go over everything else, every single wall breaker that could be good and overused. I'll talk about them all in extreme detail. But that's gonna do it for me today. I hope you enjoyed. If you did like the video, or maybe you learned something new, make sure to like the video or leave a comment on who you think is the best wall breaker right now. I'd love to see some of your thoughts. But thanks again, guys. I'll see you next time.